8:30 Central African time. We are halfway through the first hour of the show, and it's time for our hashtag Heard on Air feature. This is a part of the show where we revisit some of the wonderful conversations that you probably missed, and we're going to be revisiting a really awesome conversation from last night's show, Local Matters with Ahmed Kajee. If you haven't been in touch and in tune with what's happening at the station, well, he has a show. This all build up to the local government elections. It's called Local Matters. And he brings in studio to have one-on-one frank conversations with people that want to be your mayor after November the 4th. And he had Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. I'm sure you know her as the former UN Special Rapporteur for Health for Palestine. She's returned from that portfolio, and she's now with the Economic Freedom Fighters and wants to fight to be the first citizen of the city of Johannesburg. So here's that conversation if you missed it. Otherwise, you can catch the rest of it on our YouTube channel. Take a listen.
As a young medical doctor, I've run 4 mining clinics in the West End of Johannesburg in a gold mine. And as you can understand, how many workers one is in charge of, how many mine shafts one is in charge of, and the kinds of health systems management that's required to be able to run 4 mining clinics in a gold mine in Johannesburg in the West End in my 20s at the time. And of course, evolving as a young 30-year-old who's been involved in policy making in the Department of Social Development, for example, under the Population Development Chief Directorate, looking at youth led programs, but also doing policy specific around HIV management and prevention and sexual and reproductive health rights. And actually, in my late 20s, almost into the early 30s, having very key for the HIV program for Gauteng as a province, where we're doing HIV prevention, strategic health communications, in charge of literally crafting the language around, and I think all of us, maybe I'm too old now, but we have a memory of how even the language around HIV communication and prevention actually changed. And I was one of the people in the forefront of that kind of change. Also then having, of course, to manage my own franchises of medical practices as a general practitioner then in 4 different localities in Johannesburg, in the different regions of the metropolitan city. And also then, of course, being at the United Nations and doing multilateral work for the last 10 years, but more specifically as someone who had to answer and support and collaborate and coordinate work with 193 member states. I don't think that is a small task to do. And I think because I'm actually only now still 44, which means I was doing diplomatic work in my early 30s already. And that experience of doing work with 193 member states, that's 193 countries. I think Johannesburg has everything to gain with that kind of experience that I bring, and basically nothing to lose, because when you look back at some of these mayoral candidates I'm up against, they're well past retirement age, they're completely tired and exhausted, they're power hungry. Some of them quit when they were mayors of Johannesburg. Others lied in deceit and then told us that they moved to Johannesburg in January just to stand for mayorship. Bunch of power hungry old people who are completely tired and wrung out. And I'm saying bet on someone who firstly understands the nostalgia of a Johannesburg that used to work. I've been living here for 18 years. I'm saying bet on someone who's a great manager of resources, who actually did incredible work as an activist, advocate for human rights. My work has never been funded. I've always done everything that I have with my own resources, right?
So sorry to interject, Dr. Tlaleng.
No
I know you've spoken in detail about what vision you have for the city of Johannesburg, also with your perceived shortcomings that other mayoral candidates do have, and what sets you apart from them. But in terms of your impressive CV in the health sector as well, running the city of Johannesburg involves dealing with entities such as Eskom, Johannesburg Water, the electricity department, dealing with management of infrastructure, and then also navigating the relationships between provincial government and potentially political coalitions. But even if we have to just keep it to a national government relationship between national government, provincial government, and the city of Johannesburg, how do you manage those particular relationships from from perhaps the place of a health expert, and perhaps now that you're moving beyond health policy, it's also moving into the political space?
Yeah, so I've worked in health policy, I've worked in peace and security issues, I've worked in health systems management. I've actually have a postgrad in health economics and politics and management. And all of those things are important. But what's really key for Johannesburg, for people to understand, is that there is a cultural shift that is required for the city to succeed. Doing more of what previous mayors have done is not going to get us the Johannesburg we deserve. What we need is to actually set a new tone of how we relate with each other. For example, all of us are concerned by the city's employees. We want them to be, motivated. We want them to do the best they can. But what's important is that we don't want them to be corrupt. We need to remove this expectation and this preparedness that even as citizens we have for corruption and bribery at every single point of service that we meet any city entity or, service providers. We need to ensure that even, for example, the city is engaged in a lot of CCMA cases, a lot of litigation, all of them pointing to managers who are unable to actually bring stakeholders around the table, which is a strong point that I have. A lot of what I've had to negotiate at the multilateral space, at the diplomatic space, is precisely bringing stakeholders around the table, firstly, who are fighting, who are literally dropping bombs on each other, and thirdly, who don't think any of the problems have anything to do with them. And I'm saying that skill, that global skill of being a peace negotiator, of being a multilateral negotiator, can absolutely benefit Johannesburg. If you think about the kinds of, and you spoke about the Joburg's entities, which are fair enough. We haven't even talked about the CCMA. We haven't even discussed the unions, right? And the abrasive negative relationship that many of those entities have with the city's entities and management. And so we need to change that, because for the city to thrive, there is a framework of engagement. There's a renegotiation that has to happen, even with our own service providers in the city, even with the residents, right? And all of us immediately think billings, right? We know that's like one of the biggest spaces where citizens are frustrated, where a renegotiation has to happen, but the trust has to be built. Because if you cannot explain to citizens why particular decisions are being made or not in a particular way, you can has been stripped away for so long. And so for me, it is about really not just politically what the EFF stands for, which is about centering dignity, but it's about the process itself. It's as important as the outcome. And for far too long, we are chasing particular outcomes, which in many instances, corrupt ways and corrupt methods are actually utilized to get to particular outcomes. So we need to pay attention to also the process as much as it is the outcome. And remember, as the mayor, you have particular powers and delegation authority. Those entities exist and they are run by CEOs. I'm not supposed to pick it up. That's not my expectation as any mayor. Never mind one of City of Johannesburg. And we have a lot more entities than even compared to Cape Town, for example. What we need to embark on is to see, is investment in all of these CEOs, in all of these entities actually efficient in the literal sense, in that are we able to do service delivery, which is our core as a city? And are we able to then make sure that we have the competent people in those seats and not have, almost like these privatized way of running the city? And many of the people I'm competing with on the ballot, unfortunately, are pushing for privatization, which will further, curtail our rights to basic, services. We need actually consistent access to water, but also potable water and sanitation, not just access to food, but nutritious food. And that must be on a sustained scale, because it also not just impacts, growth and development, but even people who are ill with chronic illness need, nutritious food. You need, of course, the consistent supply of energy, because if you want to transform the local economic development sector, you cannot do that if, as an industry player, as an entrepreneur, even as a private chef, you are unable to actually do your work and meet your own outputs for your own, not just industry, but also your own, economic activity. We need spaces that are not just safe and conducive for big business, but we also have to look about the informal sector and the informal economy, because they too are important players of the actual economy as well. What we need, for example, in the transport hubs, and I met with the members of the taxi associations and the marshals and the informal traders at Breed Taxi Rank, for example, is that not only do we need more space, right, to expand these major transport hubs in and out of the city of Johannesburg, but we also need to think about how those spaces and those precincts themselves should form part of bigger development, and how then you want to expand by giving those people proper water. Bree taxi rank, for example, is so unsafe. There are no lights. There's just a microcosm.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interject again, Dr. Mofokeng. Just to find out, I mean, you've mentioned in detail the major issues which are facing the city, and I don't disagree with you on that front. I think the big thing which is important for our listeners to know is how would you change.
No, but that's why I'm giving an example of Bree, because a lot of people don't even think that even matters, all right? And why I'm speaking specifically about Bree and showing you the links between why Johannesburg cannot just give water and electricity to Bree. There's a whole expansion program that needs to happen just to that one precinct, right? At the moment, it's just the transport hub, but I'm even using words like a precinct, which means there's a kind of development idea and an agenda that has to be specific for a space such as Bree taxi rank, for example, which a lot of people just look upon as just, it's just some corner that always has litter, that always, the lights aren't working or there's water spilling everywhere. But that's a microcosm of what happens everywhere around the city of Johannesburg. Even class can no longer protect citizens of Johannesburg, because even in the so-called middle class areas, in the so-called suburbs, the electricity is not there. The streets are dark. Many of those communities have gated themselves into mini estates. They have outsourced their security to private companies. And so what we need as a city is to respect the fact that we are developmental by nature. Local government means that where the rubber meets the tar, I often say that's how scopic we need to be in terms of understanding the problems. But how we're going to solve them is going to mean that, for example, a lot of the youth need far more recreational facilities, far more culture and sports activities, even those who are out of school, because if you focus only on those in school, you're also going to leave youth behind. What does that mean as a mayor, for example, for me, is thinking about the forums that I will be starting and running myself, where I will have to mobilize resources, stop the eventing and the unending golf days that Johannesburg hosts, and actually start putting those resources into actual important programs for youth, for example. We need to think differently about how we have collaborations between provincial and national government, but also other entities of the city as well. There's a lot of businesses who will not put money back and reinvest in the city simply because of corruption. So ending corruption in Johannesburg is one major issue that we need to do, because it will unlock funds that are already budgeted for, already allocated for certain programs, which are not yielding the outcomes for the city simply because of corruption. And you have to have consequence management for all of the entities, for all of the different administrators and managers who do not do their job by when it's supposed to be done. And I think one thing all of us have normalized is this idea that, we start a project today, we don't know the timeline for the project, but it's called, a multi-million-dollar renewal project for Johannesburg. With which time frame, and how do we measure key performances, right? And so for me, transparency, as much as it's not an end point, it's a practice that we have to embed in the city's programs. A lot of what the city gets from the treasury is still not enough for Johannesburg. And so if you think about human settlement, we have to prioritize people who are already left behind, right? What does that mean? It means that we have to look at RDP houses and remove corruption from there. We have to make those services seamless so that a go-go is no longer firstly, one government department will have understood that she's indigent, she needs a grant because of age and maybe other socioeconomic circumstances, maybe have a disability or a chronic medical illness like epilepsy. Why must that person still be expected to go queue and beg the municipality not to cut off their electricity? So the approach to that, for example, as the EFF, is to say, when a person has already been determined to be indigent, their water and light tariffs have to respond and to be adjusted accordingly, so that it's not the same go-go again who must still go beg the municipality for a fair meter reading, for a fair billing for her bill for electricity. So it's more than just about, yes, we agree there's problems, but there's a process and a value system that we need to re-inject into the city. Again, why dignity matters.
We work hard to build our homes, businesses, and futures. Protecting them shouldn't mean compromising the values that matter most. ACNE Group of Companies, a Muslim-owned business, offers our short-term diamond insurance covers founded on ethical principles, transparency, integrity, and responsible service. This allows us to provide insurance solutions that align with ethical values while maintaining the protection and service standards you expect. To ensure complete peace of mind, all premiums, claims, and premium investment funds are managed through designated Sharia-compliant bank accounts, reflecting our ongoing commitment to ethical and responsible financial practices. From your first inquiry to the moment you need to claim, we are committed to providing professional, transparent, and reliable support. Choose insurance that reflects your values while giving you confidence and peace of mind. Speak to ACNE Group of Companies today to learn more about our commercial, engineering, professional indemnity, and liability diamond insurance covers. Call Rafiq Isaacs on 084-822-6570. ACNE Group of Companies comprises authorized financial services providers under FSP numbers 43281, 4553, and 45915. Products are underwritten by New National Assurance Company Limited, FSP number 2603.
Almost 1 in 5 South African children attend school each day without having eaten breakfast. This seriously affects their ability to concentrate and understand lessons. The Al Imdad Foundation's Make Breakfast Possible campaign allows learners to enjoy a high-energy cereal at the start of the school day. Help children to focus on learning and not hunger. Let's make breakfast possible today. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Shimmer, sparkle, captivate. Nothing less than a masterpiece. Droplets of gold inspires precious design. Platinum bursts with intricate freshness, and every pure diamond becomes more than just a girl's best friend. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, where timeless dreams become a reality. Come to us. We tailor-make designer gold, platinum, and diamond jewelry. Trade in or remodel your old gold. Clad yourself with classy name-branded watches. We offer insurance valuation and freezer card calculation. Visit us at 534 Ridge Road, Overport, or call 031 208 9142. Voda Gold Gem Jewelers, manufacturers of fine gold and diamond jewelry.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Al Bayt Lodge, your true home away from home. Al Bayt is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities, your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Al Bayt has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415 or visit www.albaytlodge.co.za.
Breaking stereotypes, moving boundaries, joining hands. Salam Media.
It's precisely because many people in our residence are spending so much time moving from one office to the other office to prove to the other office they have an address that's given by the other municipal entity, running back to beg the other entity not to cut off their services. So a one-stop shop in the first 100 days is something that's tangible, that's going to immediately uplift and actually take away a lot of time being wasted by residents trying to reach us for services.
Perfectly understood on that front. I'm going to link to one particular example, and it's something you mentioned at the start of the interview. And perhaps what I am trying to find out is just the how this gets done. Is you spoke about coming into the studio down the M1 and the highway lights weren't on. You drove down in darkness, right? If you were mayor tomorrow, how would you fund repairs to make sure that those lights are turned on, and where would that money come from? Because budget would need to be reallocated in some way or form. What would be your how?
No, there's no budget that must be reallocated for lights to be on in Johannesburg. This city of Johannesburg has a budget that is allocated for it, for operational costs, for maintenance, for projects and programs and all of those things. The question we must be asking as Joburgers is, why is that money that is already being put down for lights is not going to lights? And a lot of people will just accept, of course, copper gets stolen. That's what a lot of the political reasons have been for the last 15, if not 20 years now. So why are we still not getting on top of that, right? So we have to see that the lights not being on is not more than, it's a lot more than just is the infrastructure there. On the M1, for example, we know the infrastructure there. If we need more visible policing, the question is, why have the JMPD not hired more policing? Lucky for us, public safety.
I guess the question I'm trying to ask Dr. Mofokeng is, what would you do to correct that?
But that's the thing, is that we have to sit and say, is it a problem of public security where we need to actually protect our infrastructure more? In which case we need more JMPD on the ground, because we know visible policing deters crime. If the issue is that the managers of city power are not doing their job, there has to be consequence management for that. If it is that there is not enough money to keep the lights on for 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, we need to ask our questions. Who are the high consumers of electricity in Johannesburg? Are they being billed high enough to provide them industrial level power, for example, so that you are not having these so-called power outages that are planned, in inverted commas, to avoid the terms load shedding, so that we are transparent with the communities to say, this is why in your area at this point, let's say Friday, there'll be maintenance from 4 to 6. People can actually trust that it's maintenance and not just think, they are lying about load shedding again. So it could be a variety of reasons why there are no lights on the M1, right? But there isn't a scarcity in the ways that we are being made to believe, right? By those, of course, who support privatization, who support capitalistic extractive activities. And we know Johannesburg is a lot of industry. If those industries are stealing residential power and resources to a point where we have normalized that there's no power, there's no electricity, it is a problem. What we need is to have the agility to change and rezone specific areas for business so that we can then bill and record people as business consumers and charge them according to tariffs. That way we can build more power capacity to generate, and where we can save power, let's do it. So it's more than just about put on the lights or just, put more on the grid. It's about actually expanding how we think about electricity. And truly, I understand that it's more than just one problem. And maybe it is that the robots don't work because copper is being stolen. But if that's the case, how are we having a conversation with public safety? How are we having a conversation with SAPS? Because as the mayor, I'm not in charge of the South African police, right? It's on my competency. So how are we, and that's why I'm saying my advocacy skills must benefit the residents of Johannesburg, bringing stakeholders around the table to show them that when SAPS fail to be visible where they need to be, when SAPS, Mahlanga Commission, when all of that is going on, does the president understand the impact of the Mahlanga findings in the city of Johannesburg? Has our mayor had that conversation with his own comrade, who are both ANC? Your mayor is not having those conversations. He's not holding the national executive accountable for how their failures at governance at the national level affect you and I every single day as citizens in Joburg. And those automatically become what? Joburg failures. And I'm saying it's not just Joburg failures. We have to look, and where the advocacy is required, where the activism is required, where a fight on behalf of Johannesburg is required, I'm happy and willing to do that. And that's how we actually will turn this city around.
Yeah. So you've spoken, it seems that stakeholder relations and getting people around the table is a big part of what you're planning on doing should you be elected as mayor. But recently you've just spoken now around resources and what exactly that means for the city, and perhaps, whether there's too much demand on whether it be electricity or too much demand on water or too much demand on housing. There's also then the aspect of what we have seen. There's been March on March, not just in Johannesburg, but that's been across the country as well. The big debate around that was whether, does immigration have any involvement in that? Perhaps your view on immigration, a big part of some of the mayoral candidates who are running for mayor have either been, pro-legal, it's been a situation around illegal, undocumented foreign nationals in Johannesburg welcome. Is it a case of we should only be allowing documented foreign nationals to work? Where exactly do you stand?
Where did they study immigration and policing and border management, those mayoral candidates? I would like to know, just as an interesting question, because that is definitely not the competency of a mayor to enforce immigration laws. And I will not be doing that as the mayor of Johannesburg. What I will be doing is enforcing the bylaws of the city equally without fear or favor, regardless of who you are. Even South Africans are doing crime. Even South Africans are doing things they should not be doing. Madlanga Commission, I've never seen one person sit there who's a foreign national or so-called undocumented person. So the crisis that we have in this country cannot be relegated to the 1% of the population in this country. Completely reject the idea that fellow Africans, because this is about Afrophobia. I have not seen an East European, I've not seen an American, a European person, or even an Asian person who's been repatriated out of this country because of those kinds of activities that you speak of. I'm not running on, and the EFF is not running on a ticket that says it's going to be Afrophobic or hate or unleash violence on any citizen. We are saying that there are ways at the national level where this lies at the competency. Department of Home Affairs, Border Management Authority, call them in and ask them those questions about why they are not doing their job. And that's an exact example of why a national failure becomes a local municipality frustration. But the power and the delegated authority does not lie with the mayor to enforce immigration laws. We will be stuck in litigation for a very long time if people are expecting that the mayor of Johannesburg is going to enforce immigration. I'm a human rights advocate. I've been working in human rights all my life. I will not be a mayor that enforces inhumane and unleashes violence on other Africans. That is not going to happen under the EFF. We will, though, hold, like I said, the provincial leadership accountable, SAPS accountable, because they also work with immigration, and they have their role to play, with crime and prevention and response, and then, of course, the justice system. But Border Management Authority, for example, very, very key and very important as a stakeholder. Again, for those people to understand when they fail, when there's corruption, how that affects the city of Johannesburg. And that's why I take my role to advocate on behalf of Johannesburg very seriously, because I'm very aware and I respect the powers that the mayor has. I will not be embarking on a mayorship that entangles all of us in more and more litigation than we've never seen before. As capitalists are, and a lot of those mayor candidates are capitalists, they are then telling us that they're going to privatize our lives, privatize our human rights to respond to what they call efficiency gaps, when all, in fact, what they're trying to do is just loot the state more and create conditions where there'll be no accountability, because they know Johannesburg cannot afford to hold the very entities that they want to bring in as private sector to account when they are themselves leading in corruption. So we have to be very smart that we are not being pushed in a corner where we are othering each other, where we see each other as enemies by purely being human and sharing a space together. If it's not based on migration status and documentation status, next it's going to be discrimination based on age. Next, we are going to allow it based on religion. Next, we'll allow it based on sexual orientation and gender identity, all of which are already human rights principles, and you are prohibited from discriminating at someone simply because of migration status. So it's a very slippery slope, and based on our constitution, we cannot regress in terms of our human rights standing, and we will not become a city that is specifically Afrophobic, and not just xenophobic, but the specific hate for other fellow Black Africans. And as a mayor, I will not be participating in that kind of rhetoric and violence.